Welcome to the Ken McElroy Show. I'm your host, Danille, here with Ken.
Hey.
So this is one of the craziest mass migrations that we have seen in the U.S., and it's going to provide some of the best investment opportunities that we've seen in a long time. So we're going to jump into that today, but first we wanted to start with this video clip.
I believe it. You've got the number. So you tell us, how many people left Illinois, New York, and California in the last 10 years? I think you've got the absolute number, right? What is it?
Yeah, it's close to 5 million people. If you add New Jersey, which is the fourth big blue state, it's about 5 million people. This is one of the biggest mass migrations in American history. You know, if you look at, for example, the states that gained the most population over the last 10 years, you're talking about obviously Florida, Texas, South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia. Those states, the Southeast now has a larger GDP, total combined economic output, than the Northeast. That's the first time that's ever happened in American history. So what's happening is not just a migration of people to these low-tax states, but also a migration of business activity, capital investment. Look, the South is where it's at right now. And
so we were looking at this clip and we were thinking that it's interesting because right now you have the biggest migration we've seen from these big cities that have always had tons of people. They've not really dipped that bad, like New York City, Seattle, all of those kind of towns. Those were always sure investments, and
well,
now
not anymore. Not anymore. I love it. I think this is, people are looking for real estate deals. This is it. Mm-hmm. Like, people drive real estate prices. When there's a supply going from one area to another, all that does is it reduces supply. It creates a more affordable in the area where people move out of. But then it creates unaffordability, in the areas they move to. So this shift it's spectacular. It's not surprising to me at all.
No, but I think what is surprising, too, is you're not just seeing people move. You're seeing businesses move. And that's going to create even more people to move.
Yeah. Well, correct. Right. Obviously, people, there's various things why people leave. I'm being from Seattle, Portland, I pick on those all the time because those are my hometowns, Seattle specifically. People started moving years ago when all the crime and all the stuff was going on. If they worked in the city and they had business in the city, I have at least a dozen friends that moved out of Seattle. Didn't necessarily move out of state, however, but they just moved their offices. When you can't attract employees and things aren't safe and you end up not even going back to the office, you start to look at alternatives. So businesses moving, I don't think a lot of small businesses have moved, but some of the bigger notable businesses have moved, out of, some of those states as well. I'm talking about with a lot of employees.
Well, and the main driver of this that we want you guys all to understand is an affordability issue, right? Those states were unaffordable. They were not business friendly. So they were unaffordable to the businesses that are now moving, because that's why the businesses are moving. And then they're unaffordable to the people as well. And that's why we're seeing such an influx of business and people to the Midwest and to the South. Those are the two fastest growing areas right now.
I would say that most of those cities were typically not very business friendly already, way before anything. So what I mean is you take a look at the taxes and the rent and, just to park your car, if you even bring a car into town, and all the things, all the costs to have a business downtown, it's expensive. I'm picking on the core downtown areas at the moment. But then now you tag the defunding, issues and the safety issues and the crime issues and, some of the things that they're doing like in Portland and Seattle on misdemeanors and drugs and, just random things. Then people, they decide, the businesses are deciding. And so, this isn't I think a lot of people are going to want to make this a political issue. I don't really care. It just is what it is. People are moving based on what's going on in their market, period. So some people are staying and some people aren't. And you can't fight the numbers. You can't fight like really what's going on. There's big companies that obviously moved out of New York. There's big companies that moved out of Seattle, San Francisco, Portland. We, of course, know of all the big names that have moved from California to Texas, as an example, for all kinds of reasons. But at the end of the day, it's going to continue.
Yeah, and it makes so the people moving to the Midwest and the people moving to the South, and we even saw this in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, people moving from Seattle to Coeur d'Alene, their average income is much higher than the local average income. So with that, it makes, to them, it seems cheap, right? Oh,
I
we
remember.
can get this place for, $400,000. We're to a local, as the prices keep rising, it gets expensive.
I'll tell you the greatest story. True story. My own house that I bought in Coeur d'Alene on the lake, beautiful project. It was about 8,000 feet, right on the lake, and the house to my right of me got sold. I went over and met the neighbors from San Francisco, and then remember the house to the left. Remember, like, oh, where are you from? San Francisco. And then the person that bought my house also, oddly enough, San Francisco, because I sold it. And what was happening, that wasn't necessarily from Seattle, but people are frustrated with folks from California coming in and paying these high prices. There's no question, because their perspective on pricing and an area like that is very, very different. In fact, in some cases, I looked at the house, the people that bought the house that I sold, they sold their house for like $15 million or something like that, and then they bought my house, which was significantly less than that, and it was a bargain for them, I'm sure. Now, obviously, it's not the same market, not the same climate, all that kind of stuff, but people are making decisions with their wallet. They if they have a choice, obviously, they're going to move to places like the Midwest.
Yeah, in the South, because they want affordability, right? Like, things are becoming very expensive and very unaffordable in these big cities, especially like San Diego, Los Angeles, New York, Seattle, like all these places. Like, you can go move to Charlotte or Charleston for so much cheaper. But the problem before was there wasn't necessarily good work there, right? Like if you were a tech entrepreneur, you would live in San Francisco or Seattle. But now 25 to 30% of all new tech startups are starting in the Midwest or South, because it's more business friendly. They can pay people a little bit less, and the people are moving there because of that, because there's opportunity now.
Yeah, and we can banter about this topic all you want. Obviously the example I made, those folks are not moving to the Midwest, right? On those high price houses, but they're pushing people out of those markets is kind of the point. Mm-hmm. And the real issue, that you'll see in some of these small markets is the normal person, that's the hardworking American. We're talking about the teacher, the farmer, of course that, but we're talking about the service workers. Those kinds of folks are getting further and further pushed away with housing and rent, of course, too, because taking up housing. So this, again, I think you got to stay at 30,000 feet here a little bit and just take a look at, he mentioned there's 5 million people that have moved around. The number is, I've seen different numbers, but let's just use that number. What that really means is that that's putting pressure on other markets. Mm-hmm. That's really what it means. And so if it's, what's interesting is that the Northeast, which is typically, think of what's in the Northeast, Washington, D.C., New York, there's that traditionally has been kind of the power corner for pricing. And he said the GDP in the Southeast is now larger for the first time ever. And so you just got to look at that. And we really haven't even talked about Texas or Arizona or some of these other markets where people are moving. Yeah. And, the point is not to argue where they're going, why they're going. It doesn't really even matter. The point is that they're putting a lot of pressure on housing. That's actually the whole issue. and they're putting pressure on rent. They're putting pressure on housing prices. And when you have people moving to an area and you have the area also not wanting new housing, then all it does is drive the price of housing up. It's just a basic supply and demand issue. So if you look at it as a renter or if somebody's trying to buy a home, you're probably a little frustrated. And who are you going to be frustrated at? Probably the landlord or whoever. But really the issue is a supply problem. So if the politicians allowed relaxed zoning and less impact fees and those kinds of things to enable people to build, then this whole problem would get solved.
Right. But you do have to look at the affordability and why people are moving where they're moving. So, you can, and people want housing, right? Because housing's so expensive now. A lot of people want to buy housing. A lot of young people want to buy housing, right? And so right now, your average home in California is about $800,000. In Nebraska, it's about $296,000. The difference in a payment in that is $5,300 housing payment versus a $1,900 housing payment.
That's significant.
So if you can get a tech job or a decent job in either place, you're obviously, if you want to have a family, if you want to have a house, if you want to really build wealth, you're forced to move to these other states. Now, weather-wise and everything else, maybe California is more appealing, maybe, but people are now trying to think with, their long-term plan in mind. And the Midwest is the cheapest and the South is a close second. And, young people now for the first time, and this is the crazy part, young people always migrated to big cities. That was just what they did. They would graduate, they would go to a big city. Now you're seeing them going to secondary and tertiary markets. And they're doing that mainly because of affordability.
Yeah. And I those numbers you quoted, you think that extra $3,000 a month, I mean, that's a lot. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of lifestyle differences. And I know it's not apples to apples, obviously. But, and by the way, that's a decent house in Nebraska.
Yeah, that's that's a 4-bedroom.
That's the important piece to know. Yeah. I don't know if you guys have taken a look at some of the housing in LA or Southern California, but a $1 million house is 1,000 square feet. Mm-hmm. So that would be very interesting to see. If you were going apples to apples, it's probably even worse.
Yeah, you're right. It probably is, because you're probably not getting a 4-bedroom house in California for $800,000.
There's no question
in a desirable place.
Maybe in some areas,
inland,
But and so you can't blame it. People that inflation is hitting everybody, regardless of what's being reported. It's just I don't see it coming back down. I don't know about you, and wage growth is not keeping up, even though it's chipping away at it. It's not really keeping up.
Well, and I think Gavin said that's why his sister left California, for that exact reason. And I had a friend, Robin, too. They had a small 3-bedroom townhouse, husband, wife, and 2 kids, no yard. And they went, and by the time they actually were able to buy, but they sold their house in California and bought a house in Ohio for cash. That's a beautiful home, big enough for their family.
Well, I remember, didn't you say their kids were like playing out in the cul-de-sac? It's all concrete.
Well, yeah, when they were in California, right, the yard area was everybody's driveway and the townhomes connected on this big, concrete area. And that's where the kids would play, and the moms would be out there making sure everyone knew to careful backing up, because there's kids everywhere. And that was where they were playing. Where now they're in Ohio and they have, grass, and they have, bikes and all this stuff. And he's an attorney, and she had to work when they were in California, and now she can stay home. He makes a good enough salary to take care of them. And so I think a lot of people are dealing with that, on these very expensive markets. It's just they're choosing lifestyle over the big city life.
I would. I don't know about you, but I would if I was in that scenario. By the way, be careful, because Danille's from Ohio. So is her family. So we can't pick on Ohio.
What you say about
Ohio. Pick on Ohio. But, I get it. I do get it. But at the end of the day, guys, these are choices people are making. And if they have the ability to work from home, or just pop into the office every once in a while, why wouldn't you do that?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to just to kind of stay ahead.
Yeah. But I think these markets, they're not bubble markets like, Phoenix can kind of be a bubble market where prices rise and they dip and they rise and they dip. In the Midwest, there's not, in a lot of small towns in the South, there's not a lot of availability. There's not all this housing. This is all new to them. Like, this is new, getting people wanting to move there. They were losing population for so long. And so now, I know when my brother looks for a house or whatever, there's really not a lot for sale. So in these kind of markets they're more stable. So as they continue to rise, these could be really good investment opportunities, and rents in the Midwest and in the South are going up a lot, just because they're getting this influx of people they've never had before.
Well, you guys know I do a mastermind, and we meet every quarter. Well, some of the members in the mastermind are doing real estate deals in the Midwest specifically, and they've targeted those areas because those are areas where people are going, and those are areas that people can afford, and they're doing very well. It's going to continue, guys. We have such a massive housing shortage. Yeah, study after study after study. There's another one today by Moody's, said that we're at least 2 million short. That's the lowest I've seen, actually. That's Moody's. And, we're going to add, call it over a million housing units this year, which is really, really, really good. That's one of the better years we've had in a while. But I just would want you guys to remember, those deals started 2 years ago. So the multifamily will add about a little over 500,000 houses this year, and single family will add more than that, which is good. That's what we need. That's exactly what we need. We need more supply. But on the other side of that, if you look at all the National Association of Realtors, Redfin, all those people say the average the average days on market is about 6 months. That's normal. And so when you look at the normal, which is 6 months supply, that's about 1.2 million to 1.4 million. So let's call it 1.2 million, but it's definitely over 1 million. Right now, there's like 700,000 homes listed. That's it. So you have, you're at what, maybe 60% of what the average is. So you have a supply problem as far as number of listings. You have a lot of people sitting down on these really low rates that, I think last time I looked, there was 8 out of 10 people were sitting, in like 4.5% a rate or under. So whatever the Fed does this year, it's not going to really move the needle that much. And so what's really needed is supply, and supply is going to be added this year. But those deals started a couple of years ago. And as I've said before, it'll trickle into 2025. But after that, folks, we have another massive housing shortage of 2026, 27, 28, depending on what the municipalities do. So, this migration is going to push affordability. It's going to make affordability problems in a lot of markets that people aren't used to seeing them.
Yep.
And I'm talking about, these are bedroom communities that are now unaffordable. Mm-hmm. And we've always been, you can always move out of the city core into those little bedroom communities. Not anymore. A lot of those are priced too high. Yeah.
And you do, if you want to invest in the Midwest or the South or the West or wherever you want to, you just always need to make sure it cash flows, because we're getting a lot of questions right now on that.
For sure.
And okay, great, you just told me to invest in Charlotte.
No,
perfect. I'm going to go buy a house.
Don't do that. Please don't do that.
But you can invest anywhere. You just need to make sure it cash flows. But just understand, right now, these migration patterns are going to these smaller cities. I mean, even like you said, Phoenix, Tucson, San Antonio, Dallas, like all these little cities that they're migrating from these mega cities where everybody was living, because there's no jobs, because it's so expensive, because the businesses are moving. And so this is a time where you could invest and make some money, but you have to make sure whatever you invest in is currently cash flowing.
Yeah. And you guys may or may not have seen that I've listed up many different sources. There's a bunch of ways you can see where people are going. The first one is, of course, the DMV, or the Department of Motor Vehicles. When you're supposed to, get a new driver's license in a market, that's one. The Postal Service, that's two, obviously. Three, you have one-way U-Haul trips, and four, you have North American Van Lines. These are all online, and there's a whole bunch more. So you can see if somebody's moving from Seattle to Phoenix one way on a U-Haul, one way, it's a data point. That's all it is. And so these are ways that you can kind of see where everybody's going. In addition to that, the census bureaus, there's all kinds of people kind of try to figure this out. And by far, the number one for population growth, not percentage, but population growth, is Texas. Then you got Florida, you got the Carolinas, you got Tennessee is still up there, and Arizona is like 5th, 6th, or 7th now, I think. So the point is, people are moving around, and they're going to do whatever we think and whatever we say and whatever you believe. It doesn't really matter. People are going to do their thing based on what they want, and it's starting to show up. And so there's massive real estate opportunities in those markets, whether you're going to buy a single family, a duplex, four be careful, office buildings. I would. But, multifamily is going to do very, very, very well. But it's going to be soft for about 18 months. It
is. And you have to think when a high-paying job, like a tech job, comes to an area, they say it creates 5 other jobs, right? Because you have all your services, your hair people, your dry cleaners, all these things, right? So it starting a business in those booming areas can be good as well.
Yeah, and I'm going to go right to the edge of a very touchy little issue, but it's an issue that I'm experiencing firsthand. So we have apartments in a little town on the border of Arizona, and the biggest employer there is the Border Patrol. And you guys know what's going on the border. So the Border Patrol is staffing like crazy, as we're seeing all these headlines. The point is, now it can go the other way too, but right now, these little towns, I'm talking about third-tier towns. This little town is called Sierra Vista, and it has a Fort Huachuca there and also a Border Patrol. I have property there. I built it. It's brand new. It's like 250 units. It's one of my top-performing buildings because the market is just booming as a result of all the immigration stuff that's happening. So, you just got to pay attention to what is actually going on and then take advantage of it. So I'm sure I got some.
I had to laugh. Sid goes, the Border Patrol are tour guides now. So that did make me chuckle. But also, everyone's giving me a lot of crap for saying Dallas is a small city.
Yes, I know. I was going to, too.
You guys try doing stuff live, okay? Like, sometimes you say things that,
Dallas is not a small city. But they're moving from Dallas to South Lake, and Carrollton, Plano, Frisco, Richardson, all the little towns around that we have property in.
Yep,
so
absolutely.
I was going to call you out. I'm glad they did. Thank you, guys. Thank you. If I would have got in trouble. If you do it, she smiles.
Exactly. So we're going to jump into our Ken Pro questions. If you want to join Ken Pro, go to kenmcelroy.com/join-now. We do monthly happy hours. We make sure Ken answers all your questions. Also, I just lost my train of thought, so let's just jump in. If you're watching on YouTube, please ask a question. I'll get to a couple of them. All right. David is asking, taking your advice and maintaining a cash flow positive, I found my first house. It's a foreclosure, $150,000 in North Dakota. I can only get approved for a 20% down loan. I can only put 10% down. Can you recommend other options?
Ooh.
So it's a $15,000 issue.
Okay. Well, it's a small amount. So I not to minimize it. I'm just saying if it's a $15,000 issue, if you can get somebody to give you a quick little line of credit or something, that's what Danille's done on a couple of her little deals. Mm-hmm. But I think if it's an investment property, I always tell people, well, how I started was the same way. I ran out of money after my first investment that cash flowed. And then I had to save again. And then, once you start to see the cash flow, you're like, man, I want to do that again. And then at some point you do run out of money. And that's when you have to put on the OPM hat or other people's money hat. And you can start to partner with people. You can start to look at other things other than yourself. A lot of people just don't like doing that. I get it. Actually, Danille doesn't necessarily like it. I love it. I think it's a great way to leverage. There's so many people out there that are sitting on savings and are looking for deals. So if you really truly have a good deal that cash flows, you might have to give up a little bit of the cash flow. But it sounds to me like you might have a 50-50 partnership here with somebody. You put in the money, that somebody else puts in the money. You run it, take a little fee for that, and move on to the next one.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Or you can even do a deal where you borrow the $15,000 at a different percentage rate and you pay them back.
Yeah.
Earl is asking, I would like to know if Wickenburg, Arizona is a good place to invest. I heard about a resort there. There's an individual selling a property and I immediately thought of Airbnb. What do you think of that? And then is this something I can negotiate down with the property owner?
Wow. Wickenburg's an interesting little town. I'd be careful, be honest. It's a good hour away. Now, it depends on the cash flow and what you buy it for. And I don't know about Airbnb. It's a little far out for that. We're having problems in the Phoenix area, which is closer to where everybody wants to be. For Airbnb, but Wickenburg is more like a place people go to RV for the weekend, and it's a little different than I personally would never probably run an Airbnb in Wickenburg. Not to say that people don't, obviously they do, but it's just a little far out for my choosing. However, the TMC, the huge chip manufacturer, is not far from there. That's being built out here. It's a $40 billion with a B dollar project, and now that's a little different. Obviously, that's more employment, but
sometimes I think people get thrown off when they see like a resort or some Airbnbs in the area that are making it, and they're like, well, if that resort makes it, I can make it, or if that Airbnb is making it, I can make it. But what they don't account for is, what did they buy the resort or Airbnb for, and what's their interest rate? So, say, he said this property is $490. Well, maybe 3 years ago they were like $280, and the interest rate's at 2.5%. So that's a lot easier to make that cash flow.
Yeah, the other thing, I own a resort in Sedona, Arizona, and most of you have heard of that. It's a lot of people stay in Sedona and then go to the Grand Canyon for the day, and it's if it's not one, it's two in the biggest tourist destination in Arizona. It's up there. I think Grand Canyon is number one. So anyway, I own a resort there, and we run about 65 or 70% occupancy for the year. So, there are times where we're full and there are times where we're not full. It's a nightly thing, and now we're profitable and all that. But I would just caution you, everybody, what does it really mean?
Right.
What does that really mean?
Yeah, and like we always say with Airbnbs, they're great as long as you can cash flow them as a long term.
Yeah, and then I do know this. I do know that Airbnb as a company has grown year over year, but so has the listings, especially in Arizona. I believe they've almost doubled. So you might be on the tail end of a Airbnb bubble.
Yeah. I think it's already starting to show cracks. From YouTube, Becky is asking, Ken, I'm seeing a lot of noise from several folks that there's warning of a crash in the multifamily market, so the apartment space. What do you say about that?
I think that's it depends on the syndicator. It depends. Well, there's many things. The first one is, the irony is that the assets themselves, the property themselves, are actually pretty good deals. Now, did they overpay a year or two ago? Very possibly. So we're talking about people that bought something, let's say, in the last 3 years. Now, if they're forced to sell, then they probably have a bit of a problem. So what would make somebody forced to sell? One would be a loan maturity, or perhaps an equity maturity. So let's say they borrowed the money from a big group and they want their money back, or it could be other reasons. But if they had floating rate debt and that debt payment, I think I told the story. I was playing golf with a friend of mine. I'm obviously hanging around with real estate guys all the time. They had a property in Florida, a big one, where their mortgage payment went from like $300 to $500 like a month. As a result of the
$300,000 to $500,000.
Yeah, $300,000 to $500,000 a month, and that's like $250,000. That's like $2.5 million in cash flow gone. Well, that's not supposed to happen. So when those things happen, people start to look at selling stuff, and so you're going to see that this year for sure. You're going to see some new construction issues. Because construction debt's expensive. This all revolves around interest rates, and then of course if people don't have the money to keep the properties, you're going to see them hitting the market. In fact, this week is the National Multi-Housing Council in San Diego, and there's there'll be 10,000 people there. And you're going to see a lot of new product hit the market here in the next 60 days. A lot. And probably record numbers. It's going to be fun.
Enterprise from YouTube's asking, I have 40 acres of vacant land in California. No utilities. Any suggestion on how to make it cash flow, or should I just sell it?
Solar, billboards, there's a bunch of ways. I know.
RV rental,
yeah, potentially. Anything that you can lease to somebody else and not sell the land. There's I know all kinds of people that are doing it. The utility issue is a little bit of a problem. I don't know what it costs for you to bring the utilities on, but obviously, most of those things I just mentioned are going to need at least electrical. So now I think a lot of billboards and solar, of course, but I do think that there's power grids and stuff that need to be run. So, that's what I would do. I would look for anything, any kind of signage. There's a fair amount of people. You can even sublease the land, perhaps, to somebody else for something. So, but it's a good question.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today. We will see you all next week.
See you guys.